We begin the proceedings of the online workshop titled RS and GIS Application in Biodiversity Conservation and Management. I invite Mr. Mustafa Kamal to recite few verses from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون صدق الله العظيم.
I now invite the Chairman, Department of Wildlife Sciences, Professor Jamal Khan, to deliver welcome address.
Warm and hearty greetings from the Aligarh Muslim University. Assalamu alaikum, namaskar, sat sri akal, and a very good morning to all the esteemed panelists and participants of the workshop. First of all, I extend a warm welcome to the Chief Guest, Professor Tariq Mansoor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Aligarh Muslim University. Guest of Honor, Professor Wasim Ahmed, Dean, Faculty of Life Science. Dr. Prakash Chauhan, Director, IIRS, Dehradun. Dr. Poonam S. Tiwari ji, Scientist, IIRS, Dehradun. Dr. Basoon K. Gupta, Scientist, IIRS, Dehradun. Professor Afifullah Khan, OSD, Development of the Aligarh Muslim University. And all esteemed and valued participants of the workshop. Thank you very much for joining this online event. I'm extremely grateful to Professor Tariq Mansoor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Aligarh Muslim University, for his kind permission for holding this workshop. And he very graciously agreed to address this August gathering as the chief guest. Thank you very much, sir. The RS and GIS is a very powerful tool which has wide applications and utility in almost all disciplines and sectors. Our country has made tremendous progress in recent times utilizing the RS and GIS data. In this regard, there is one organization which every Indian should not only be proud of, but also have gratitude to it, and that organization is ISRO. The ISRO has done a commendable job by establishing remote sensing institutes and centers in each state of India, including the Indian Institute of Remote Sensing in Dehradun. I wish to make all panelists and participants aware that the Aligarh Muslim University has had a long and close association with the Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, Dehradun. The IIRS has contributed immensely in capacity building, in which the AMU and its various departments have been major beneficiaries. We have collaborated with IIRS and its core faculty on major research projects of the Department of Science and Technology and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. The IIRS has generously helped us, and a big thanks to the Director IIRS for it, its core faculty for support. I sincerely hope that the mutual collaboration will blossom in future too, and both organizations will offer customized skill empowering programs to Indian students, scientists, teachers, and also policymakers. Back at the Aligarh Muslim University, Professor Iqbaluddin of the Department of Geology established Remote Sensing Center at AMU with funding from the Department of Science and Technology and technical support of IIRS. Professor Iqbaluddin made a seminal contribution in the field of remote sensing with excellent track record in human resource development. The center functioned for almost 14 years and it was closed due to lack of funding. A decade and a half later, here was a dynamic leader, a visionary, a man who understood and valued the role of technology in development of our proud country, immense benefits which the RS and GIS technology brings to society in a myriad ways, and the role a university and powerful Indian university system comprising of more than 800 universities, colleges, and schools can play in human resource development. This leader par excellence not only gave life to a dead unit, but also upgraded it to the status of a full-fledged academic department of studies titled Interdisciplinary Department of Remote Sensing and GIS Applications at Aligarh Muslim University. This department now offers postgraduate and doctoral program in RS and GIS applications. He went on to fund the unit very generously, and I, being the OSD development of this great leader at that time, take quite a lot of pride in revival of this remote sensing and GIS application department at the Aligarh Muslim University. This dynamic leader is none other than the chief guest of today's program, Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Tariq Mansoor. I sincerely hope IDRS and GISA at AMU will have meaningful collaboration with IIRS Dehradun. Over the next 2 days, there is going to be great opportunity for learning, critical thinking, conceptualization of new ideas, and a very meaningful interaction between a very competent teachers, albeit speakers, who are panelists today, and equally competent students, albeit the participants. There shall be definitely many takeaways from the workshop. I wish happy learning to every participant. I wish all participants feel enriched after the workshop. I wish and pray to Almighty for a great and good luck for each of the more than 1,000 participants attending this workshop today, that he or she be blessed by God with safe, bright, prosperous, and golden future. Dhanyavad, shukran jazilan. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, I very humbly request the Chief Guest, Professor Tariq Mansoor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Aligarh Muslim University, to address the panelists and participants of this workshop.
Dean Faculty of Science, Life Sciences, Professor Wasim Ahmed, Chairperson, Department of Wildlife Sciences, Professor Jamal Khan, Resource Persons, Dr. Poonam S. Tiwari, Shri Prasoon Kumar Gupta, Professor Hafifullah Khan, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning to all of you. I am really delighted to be here this morning for this workshop on RS and GIS applications in biodiversity conservation and management. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Professor Jamal Khan, Chairperson, Department of Wildlife Sciences, and his team for organizing this workshop on a very pertinent subject. Our life, as all of you must be aware, there are only a few wildlife science departments in India. And we are fortunate, our university is fortunate to have one of them. And we are definitely proud of the Department of Wildlife Sciences and the work which it is doing. Under the leadership of Professor Jamal Khan and other senior teachers of the department, they have brought many projects and done very worthwhile and significant research in biodiversity conservation as well as some specific wildlife conservation. This topic of this workshop is something which is of interest to the common man also. Because whenever you talk and speak about biodiversity conservation or wildlife conservation, it interests many others, not only just the specialists. India has made many important strides in conservation of its biodiversity and many species of wildlife such as tigers, lions, deers and so many other animals, as well as birds. The landmark decision which was taken many decades before to ban shooting and hunting has definitely played a very important role in this. Remote sensing and GIS applications will definitely help in biodiversity conservation. And we also, as the chairperson, Professor Jamal has rightly pointed out, we also have a department of remote sensing and GIS applications. And recently we have also appointed some new persons there. And we are committed for further development of that department. They have also brought a number of projects also from various government agencies, which are of course not related to wildlife but related to other things, Waqf properties and others. So my wish is that the Department of Wildlife Sciences and the Department of Remote Sensing and GIS Applications should do a multidisciplinary research also. Though they are not of the same faculty, one is of life science, the other is of science. But definitely this multidisciplinary research can be done. And some students, they can be allotted some thesis also, PhDs, thesis, in which one supervisor can be from the Department of Wildlife and the co-supervisor can be from GIS, Department of Remote Sensing and GIS Applications. So I think this will definitely help in further research in this. Because as the chairperson has rightly pointed out, GIS applications, and remote sensing, they are playing a very important role. Not only in India, but in other countries also, regarding biodiversity conservation and wildlife management. India is a country which is very rich in biodiversity. And you'll be surprised to know that one of the very small states in India, that state is one of the richest in biodiversity, that is Manipur. Actually, the whole of the Northeast is very rich in biodiversity. But Manipur is one of the richest, biodiversity states in India. And we also have many other areas in India which are very rich in biodiversity. The Valley of Flowers in Uttarakhand. And so many other places are there, which are treasures of biodiversity. And it is our duty of all of us to conserve this. For this, we require sustainable development. Without sustainable development, you cannot conserve biodiversity. And the challenge which is there before the world is, one is the climate change. So we have to take this head on, and all of us must cooperate. The general public should also cooperate in this management of climate change. We are seeing so many effects of climate change. The hurricanes which are coming, the storms which are coming. Earlier, in the Arabian Sea or in the Bay of Bengal, the storms, they used to come after 10 years, 20 years. Now they are coming after every 3-4 years. The frequency has also increased. It is all due to the climate change. and this will further increase. Many low-lying countries like Maldives and other places, they are facing danger of getting submerged in the future after, say, 50 years, 100 years. As the sea level will rise due to the problems in the glaciers and in other places, definitely the sea level is going to rise because the melting starts the glaciers, which will be, of course, which will be a very slow and gradual process. We are also seeing the devastating forest fires. You must have read in the newspaper the fires which have occurred in California, in Australia, and even in India and Uttarakhand, we have seen forest fires occurring. In many other countries which earlier were not seeing forest fires, like Spain, Turkey, Greece, they have seen a lot of, and Algeria, Morocco. These countries were not seeing these forest fires in the way they are now. We are seeing that hundreds of kilometers of, for Brazil also, the Amazon forest fires, they are, in the last 2-3 years, a lot of fires have occurred there also. So this is definitely a challenge. And it is climate change is definitely playing one of course, it is multifactorial, but one of the factors is climate change also. Then the other thing is water conservation and protection of our rivers, lakes and ponds. Because without water, adequate water supply and adequate water, we will not be able to properly conserve our biodiversity, whether it is in India or abroad, in the whole world. Earlier in India, the heritage was that every village will have a water body, pond or something, it will always be there. But now we are seeing that either those at many places they have disappeared, and where they are still there, at many places they are still there, they have become very much polluted. So we have to address this problem by education and by public awareness. The government cannot do everything. The public has also to be aware, and it has also to cooperate in all these matters. We also have to control the global population, because if the population will increase in the world, it will put a stress, and all these resources, they will come under pressure, whether they are forests or they are agriculture land or many other things, our rivers, water resources, everything will come under pressure if we are not able to do sustainable development. And population control is also part of this sustainable development. I was seeing the scientific program of this workshop, and I was very much impressed that so many new techniques have come for conservation of biodiversity related to remote sensing and GIS applications. And there will be lectures on image classification techniques and new softwares such as QGIS software and mobile GIS. So I'm sure that this workshop will greatly benefit all the participants. And I wish it all the best. And I once again congratulate the chairperson and his team for organizing this scientific program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Sir, for your kind address. Now, I request the guest of honor, Professor Wasim Ahmed, Dean Faculty of Life Sciences, Aligarh Muslim University, to address the gathering.
Hello. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Tariq Mansoor Saab, Professor Jamal Ahmed Khan, Chairperson, Department of Wildlife Sciences, and convener of the workshop on remote sensing and GIS application in biodiversity conservation and management. Our learned speakers, Professor Afiqullah Khan, Dr. Poonam Tiwari, Sri Parsun Kumar Gupta, and Dr. Nazneen. My dear colleagues, students, and participants from far players who are connected to this virtual program. On behalf of the Faculty of Life Sciences, Aligarh, I welcome you all to this important workshop on biodiversity, which is also my, whereas in the workshop, the discussions will be mainly restricted to ground diversity. I would be explaining a little bit about his own department itself, which has made lots of contribution in wildlife sciences in this country. To begin with, in 1985, under the leadership of Professor Abbas Hassan Muswi and overall supervision of great ornithologist Dr. Salim Ali, this center mainly started working on birds, but later the dynamic faculty members have devoted substantially to the study of higher mammals in different national parks, and they had a very big project in the Gir forest on tigers. Of course, as a man of biodiversity, I would be saying that sustainable management of natural resources has become a key issue for the survival of the planet Earth. We are seeing the natural calamities are disturbing the whole system, and the loss of biodiversity is nowadays very distinctly visible. Conservation of biodiversity and natural resources has been a priority agenda throughout the world, especially in the late part of 20th century, and more so after the Earth Summit 1992 at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Biodiversity conservation has been put to highest priority in India, being 11th mega biodiversity country in the world, with officially, we of course generally say 2 hotspots, but officially there are 4 biodiversity hotspots out of the 36 biodiversity hotspots in the world, namely Himalayas, Western Ghats, Indo-Burma region, and Sundarland. Of course, that includes our Sundarbans and Terai belt. Although the hotspots cover only 2.3% of the land area, they have around 44% of the plant species and 35% vertebrates. Our information on invertebrate diversity is very scanty, and if we talk of invertebrate, it is almost soil invertebrates. It is almost negligible. I'm talking this because today in the audience there are lots of biodiversity experts, so I would like to little bit emphasize on the soil biodiversity. Soil biodiversity emerged as a global agenda of research and management only since last 2 decades or so, when United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity set out a program to work on agriculture biodiversity. Soil invertebrates play an important role in regulating ecosystem processes, and their contribution to soil process and ecosystem services vary depending upon the animal type. The importance of earthworms, termites, litter-feeding arthropods, and nematodes in regulation of soil physical structure, decomposition, and nutrient dynamics has been established. The structure and composition of soil invertebrate fauna reflects soil ecosystem health. Despite their importance for ecosystem functioning, very few quantitative, especially explicit models of active below-ground diversity or below-ground community currently exist in this, especially with reference to nematodes, which are the most abundant animals on Earth, filling all trophic levels in the soil food web. For that, what we did, we took this challenge, and a group of over 50 scientists from around the world planned a study to understand pattern of global abundance of nematodes in soil and the composition of their functional group. I was the only scientist representing this entire subcontinent in this group. The result of this study has been published recently in Nature. What we concluded from we had around 6,759 georeference samples from around the world to generate the data. The result indicated that the number of nematodes there, that is, they are around 4.4 into 10 to the power 20 nematodes with total biomass of, you can imagine, 0.3 gigaton inhabits just the soil surface. If we convert this in terms of the number of human beings, it comes to about 57 billion nematodes per human beings. This abundance is around 38% in the subarctic region, 24% in temperate, and 21% in tropics. This translates to approximately 0.03 gigaton of carbon and represents 82% of total human biomass. You can imagine the total biomass which these tiny creatures have. Using same database of nematode metabolic activity, we estimated that nematodes may be responsible for monthly carbon turnover of 0.14 gigaton within the global growing season, of which 0.11 gigaton is respired into atmosphere. By comparison, the amount of carbon respired by soil nematode is equivalent to roughly 15% of carbon emission from fossil fuel, or around 2.2% of total carbon emission from the soil. So these nematodes play a crucial role in environment, as they are responsible for production of about 19% of ammonia of soil. As a biologist, we talk a lot about biodiversity, inventory, distribution, population structure, and their conservation, but emphasis has always been on above ground diversity. I'm not saying it is not important, but the other half, that is below ground diversity, must be included in our environment management programs, because the plants which are at the interface of above and below ground diversity and are necessary for the survival of above ground diversity cannot survive themselves without good soil health. And for a good soil health, it fully depends on below ground diversity. So the survival of the plants depends on below ground diversity, and the survival of above ground diversity depends upon the plants. So you can see how much important the below ground diversity is. I'm sorry I got diverted to my own area of interest. The present workshop on remote sensing and GIS application is one of the frontline methodology to study above ground biodiversity. Professor Jamal has discussed a lot about remote sensing, and of course in our university we have a full-fledged remote sensing department, and in collaboration, our wildlife department, in collaboration with GIS remote sensing department, they are doing wonderful research. The application of a space-based remote sensing and GIS have wide applications and advantages in the field of environment and biodiversity conservation. Together, RS and GIS present the facility of proficient and cost-effective means of acquiring timely data for the advancement of management of natural resources. Earlier, we used to have persons who will be moving around the forest and counting every animal, counting every tiger, counting every elephant. So now we have techniques by which from the space itself, with the help of our satellites itself, we can get the data. As the application of choice, GIS has central role in analyzing the geographic distribution of endangered species, and of course geographic distribution of all the species, in measuring and monitoring biodiversity, and in identifying priorities for the conservation and management. When we talk of endangered species, I always use one term, and I've been saying that in Ministry of Environment also and several countries. When we talk of endangered species, we are not talking of endangered taxonomists themselves, because the man who are responsible for the identification of animals, they have themselves become endangered, and we have to look for that we should be responsible, we should be thinking about conservation of those peoples who used to identify the animals. There has been a remarkable increase in Earth observation satellite and sensors over the last few years that are being used to measure and model biodiversity from space. Advances in resolution of space-borne sensors available to ecologists are making it increasingly possible to distinguish species assemblages or identify individual species, whether it is thermal remote sensing or hyper remote sensing or LIDAR remote sensing. They provide very accurate data on distribution, movement, and population structure of both animals and plants. I hope during these 2 days, our learned speakers who have great experience in remote sensing and GIS application, and with the help of our institute in Dehradun, they will have great discussions in detail about the techniques, which will be highly beneficial to our research scholars or young researchers, and that will give us a I would be saying, as a biodiversity expert, I would be saying the correct data on the biodiversity of our forest to begin with, and general information about all the biodiversity. Because sometimes when we come up with the data, there are sometimes some people raise fingers that the number of tigers we are talking about or the number of elephants we are talking about is not correct. So the GIS application will be giving us, or it gives the correct data. I hope that the 2 days discussions will be very beneficial to all the participants. I wish best of luck to all the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, respected sir, for your address. I now request Dr. Satish Kumar to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Nazreen. Good morning and adab to everyone. I myself, as well as on behalf of the workshop organizers, wish to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Tariq Mansoor sir, to be with us and to grace the occasion. We are equally grateful to our Dean, Professor Wasim Ahmad, for sparing his valuable time and joining us today. Also, we are grateful to the Director, Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, Dehradun, for allowing his scientists to deliver important lectures on important techniques for assessing biodiversity to our participants and in the workshop. Now, I would like to take the opportunity to extend my thanks to all our panelists, Professor Afifullah Khan, Dr. Poonam Seth Tiwari, Dr. Prasun Kumar Gupta, who would be delivering and sharing very valuable information with us and our participants for the next 2 days. We are equally grateful to the director, Dr. Parvez Mahmood Khan Sahab, and his expert team for setting up the platform for today's online workshop. Lastly, I want to thank all the participants who are attending this workshop from different institutes, colleges, universities, and wish them all the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I now request the Director, Computer Center, and his competent team, who very kindly agreed to host the event, to play AMU Tarana, which will be followed by a national anthem. All are requested to stand in attention position when the national anthem is played.
And hearty greetings from the Aligarh Muslim University. Assalamu alaikum, namaskar, sat sri akal, and a very good morning to all the esteemed panelists and participants of the workshop. First of all, I extend a warm welcome to the chief guest, Professor Tariq Mansoor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Aligarh Muslim University. Guest of honor, Professor Wasim Ahmad, Dean, Faculty of Life Science. Dr. Prakash Chauhan, Director, IIRS, Dehradun. Dr. Poonam S. Tiwari ji, Scientist, IIRS, Dehradun. Dr. Prasun K. Gupta, Scientist, IIRS, Dehradun. Professor Afifullah Khan, OSD, Development of the Aligarh Muslim University. And all esteemed and valued participants of the workshop. Thank you very much for joining this online event. I'm extremely grateful to Professor Tariq Mansoor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Aligarh Muslim University, for his kind permission for holding this workshop. And he very graciously agreed to address this August gathering as the chief guest. Thank you very much, sir. The RS and GIS is a very powerful tool which has wide applications and utility in almost all disciplines and sectors. Our country has made tremendous progress in recent times utilizing the RS and GIS data. In this regard, there is one organization which every Indian should not only be proud of, but also have gratitude to it, and that organization is ISRO. The ISRO has done a commendable job by establishing remote sensing institutes and centers in each state of India, including the Indian Institute of Remote Sensing in Dehradun. I wish to make all panelists and participants aware that the Aligarh Muslim University has had a long and close association with the Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, Dehradun. The IIRS has contributed immensely in capacity building, in which the AMU and its various departments have been major beneficiaries. We have collaborated with IIRS and its core faculty on major research projects of the Department of Science and Technology and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. The IIRS has generously helped us, and a big thanks to the Director IIRS for it, its core faculty for support. I sincerely hope that the mutual collaboration will blossom in future too, and both organizations will offer customized skill empowering programs to Indian students, scientists, teachers, and also policymakers. Back at the Aligarh Muslim University, Professor Iqbaluddin of the Department of Geology established Remote Sensing Center at AMU with funding from the Department of Science and Technology and technical support of IIRS. Professor Iqbaluddin made a seminal contribution in the field of remote sensing with excellent track record in human resource development. The center functioned for almost 14 years and it was closed due to lack of funding. A decade and a half later, here was a dynamic leader, a visionary, a man who understood and valued the role of technology in development of our proud country, immense benefits which the RS and GIS technology brings to society in a myriad ways, and the role a university and powerful Indian university system comprising of more than 800 universities, colleges, and schools can play in human resource development. This leader par excellence not only gave life to a dead unit, but also upgraded it to the status of a full-fledged academic department of studies titled Interdisciplinary Department of Remote Sensing and GIS Applications at Aligarh Muslim University. This department now offers postgraduate and doctoral program in RS and GIS applications. He went on to fund the unit very generously, and I, being the OSD development of this great leader at that time, take quite a lot of pride in revival of this remote sensing and GIS application department at the Aligarh Muslim University. This dynamic leader is none other than the chief guest of today's program, Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Tariq Mansoor. I sincerely hope IDRS and GISA at AMU will have meaningful collaboration with IIRS Dehradun. Over the next 2 days, there is going to be great opportunity for learning, critical thinking, conceptualization of new ideas, and a very meaningful interaction between a very competent teachers, albeit speakers, who are panelists today, and equally competent students, albeit the participants. There shall be definitely many takeaways from the workshop. I wish happy learning to every participant. I wish all participants feel enriched after the workshop. I wish and pray to Almighty for a great and good luck for each of the more than 1,000 participants attending this workshop today, that he or she be blessed by God with safe, bright, prosperous, and golden future. Dhanyavad, Shukran Jazilan. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, I very humbly request the Chief Guest, Professor Tariq Mansoor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Aligarh Muslim University, to address the panelists and participants of this workshop.
Dean Faculty of Science, Life Sciences, Professor Wasim Ahmed, Chairperson, Department of Wildlife Sciences, Professor Jamal Khan, Resource Persons, Dr. Poonam S. Tiwari, Shri Prasoon Kumar Gupta, Professor Hafifullah Khan, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning to all of you. I am really delighted to be here this morning for this workshop on RS and GIS applications in biodiversity conservation and management. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Professor Jamal Khan, Chairperson, Department of Wildlife Sciences, and his team for organizing this workshop on a very pertinent subject. Our life, as all of you must be aware, there are only a few wildlife science departments in India. And we are fortunate, our university is fortunate to have one of them. And we are definitely proud of the Department of Wildlife Sciences and the work which it is doing. Under the leadership of Professor Jamal Khan and other senior teachers of the department, they have brought many projects and done very worthwhile and significant research in biodiversity conservation as well as some specific wildlife conservation. This topic of this workshop is something which is of interest to the common man also. Because whenever you talk and speak about biodiversity conservation or wildlife conservation, it interests many others, not only just the specialists. India has made many important strides in conservation of its biodiversity and many species of wildlife such as tigers, lions, deers and so many other animals, as well as birds. The landmark decision which was taken many decades before to ban shooting and hunting has definitely played a very important role in this. Remote sensing and GIS applications will definitely help in biodiversity conservation. And we also, as the chairperson, Professor Jamal has rightly pointed out, we also have a department of remote sensing and GIS applications. And recently we have also appointed some new persons there. And we are committed for further development of their department. They have also brought a number of projects also from various government agencies, which are of course not related to wildlife but related to other things, Waqf properties and others. So my wish is that the Department of Wildlife Sciences and the Department of Remote Sensing and GIS applications should do a multidisciplinary research also. Though they are not of the same faculty, one is of life science, the other is of science. But definitely this multidisciplinary research can be done. And some students, they can be allotted some thesis also, PhDs, thesis, in which one supervisor can be from the Department of Wildlife and the co-supervisor can be from GIS, Department of Remote Sensing and GIS applications. So I think this will definitely help in further research in this. Because as the chairperson has rightly pointed out, GIS applications, and remote sensing, they are playing a very important role. not only in India but in other countries also, regarding biodiversity conservation and wildlife management. India, the country which is very rich in biodiversity. And you'll be surprised to know that one of the very small states in India, that state is one of the richest in biodiversity, that is Manipur. Actually, the whole of the Northeast is very rich in biodiversity. But Manipur is one of the richest, biodiversity states in India. And we also have many other areas in India which are very rich in biodiversity. The Valley of Flowers in Uttarakhand. And so many other places are there, which are treasures of biodiversity. And it is our duty of all of us to conserve this. For this, we require sustainable development. Without sustainable development, you cannot conserve biodiversity. And the challenge which is there before the world is, one is the climate change. So we have to take this head on, and all of us must cooperate. The general public should also cooperate in this management of climate change. We are seeing so many effects of climate change. The hurricanes which are coming, the storms which are coming. Earlier, in the Arabian Sea or in the Bay of Bengal, the storms, they used to come after 10 years, 20 years. Now they are coming after every 3-4 years. The frequency has also increased. It is all due to the climate change. And this will further increase. Many low-lying countries like Maldives and other places, they are facing danger of getting submerged in the future after, say, 50 years, 100 years. As the sea level will rise due to the problems in the glaciers and in other places, definitely the sea level is going to rise because the melting starts the glaciers, which will be, of course, a very slow and gradual process. We are also seeing the devastating forest fires. You must have read in the newspaper the fires which have occurred in California, in Australia, and even in India and Uttarakhand, we have seen forest fires occurring. In many other countries which earlier were not seeing forest fires, like Spain, Turkey, Greece, they have seen a lot of, and Algeria, Morocco. These countries were not seeing these forest fires in the way they are now. We are seeing that hundreds of kilometers of, for Brazil also, the Amazon forest fires, they are, in the last 2-3 years, a lot of fires have occurred there also. So this is definitely a challenge. And it is climate change is definitely playing one of course, it is multifactorial, but one of the factors is climate change also. Then the other thing is water conservation and protection of our rivers, lakes and ponds. Because without adequate water supply and adequate water, we will not be able to properly conserve our biodiversity, whether it is in India or abroad, in the whole world. Earlier in India, the heritage was that every village will have a water body, pond or something, will always be there. But now we are seeing that either those, at many places they have disappeared, and where they are still there, at many places they are still there, they have become very much polluted. So we have to address this problem by education and by public awareness. The government cannot do everything. The public has also to be aware, and it has also to cooperate in all these matters. We also have to control the global population, because if the population will increase in the world, it will put a stress, and all these resources, they will come under pressure, whether they are forests or they are agricultural land or many other things, our rivers, water resources, everything will come under pressure if we are not able to do sustainable development. And population control is also part of this sustainable development. I was seeing the scientific program of this workshop, and I was very much impressed that so many new techniques have come for conservation of biodiversity related to remote sensing and GIS applications. And there will be lectures on image classification techniques and new softwares such as QGIS software and mobile GIS. So I'm sure that this workshop will greatly benefit all the participants. And I wish it all the best. And I once again congratulate the chairperson and his team for organizing this scientific program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Sir, for your kind address. Now, I request the guest of honor, Professor Wasim Ahmed, Dean Faculty of Life Sciences, Aligarh Muslim University, to address the gathering.
Hello. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Tariq Mansoor Saab, Professor Jamal Ahmed Khan, Chairperson, Department of Wildlife Sciences, and convener of the workshop on remote sensing and GIS application in biodiversity conservation and management. Our learned speakers, Professor Afifullah Khan, Dr. Poonam Tiwari, Sri Parsun Kumar Gupta, and Dr. Nazneen. My dear colleagues, students, and participants from far off places who are connected to this virtual program. On behalf of the Faculty of Life Sciences, Aligarh, I welcome you all to this important workshop on biodiversity, which is also my, whereas in the workshop, the discussions will be mainly restricted to ground diversity. I would be explaining a little bit about his own department itself, which has made lots of contribution in wildlife sciences in this country. To begin with, in 1985, under the leadership of Professor Abbas Hassan Muswi and overall supervision of great ornithologist Dr. Salim Ali, this center mainly started working on birds, but later the dynamic faculty members have devoted substantially to the study of higher mammals in different national parks, and they had a very big project in the Gir forest on tigers. Of course, as a man of biodiversity, I would be saying that sustainable management of natural resources has become a key issue for the survival of the planet Earth. We are seeing the natural calamities are disturbing the whole system, and the loss of biodiversity is nowadays very distinctly visible. Conservation of biodiversity and natural resources has been a priority agenda throughout the world, especially in the late part of 20th century, and more so after the Earth Summit 1992 at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Biodiversity conservation has been put to highest priority in India, being 11th mega biodiversity country in the world, with officially, we of course generally say 2 hotspots, but officially there are 4 biodiversity hotspots out of the 36 biodiversity hotspots in the world, namely Himalayas, Western Ghats, Indo-Burma region, and Sundarland. Of course, that includes our Sundarbans and Terai belt. Although the hotspots cover only 2.3% of the land area, they have around 44% of the plant species and 35% vertebrates. Our information on invertebrate diversity is very scanty, and if we talk of invertebrate, it is almost soil invertebrates, it is almost negligible. I'm talking this because today in the audience there are lots of biodiversity experts, so I would like to little bit emphasize on the soil biodiversity. Soil biodiversity emerged as a global agenda of research and management only since last 2 decades or so, when United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity set out a program to work on agricultural biodiversity. Soil invertebrates play an important role in regulating ecosystem processes and their contribution to soil process and ecosystem services vary depending upon the animal type. The importance of earthworms, termites, litter-feeding arthropods, and nematodes in regulation of soil physical structure, decomposition, and nutrient dynamics has been established. The structure and composition of soil invertebrate fauna reflects soil ecosystem health. Despite their importance for ecosystem functioning, very few quantitative, especially explicit models of active below-ground diversity or below-ground community currently exist especially with reference to nematodes, which are the most abundant animals on Earth, filling all trophic levels in the soil food web. For that, what we did, we took this challenge and a group of over 50 scientists from around the world planned a study to understand pattern of global abundance of nematodes in soil and the composition of their functional group. I was the only scientist representing this entire subcontinent in this group. The result of this study has been published recently in Nature. What we concluded from we had around 6,759 georeference samples from around the world to generate the data. The result indicated that the number of nematodes there, that is, they are around 4.4 into 10 to the power 20 nematodes with total biomass of, you can imagine, 0.3 gigaton inhabits just the soil surface. If we convert this in terms of the number of human beings, it comes to about 57 billion nematodes per human beings. This abundance is around 38% in the subarctic region, 24% in temperate, and 21% in tropics. This translates to approximately 0.03 gigaton of carbon and represents 82% of total human biomass. You can imagine the total biomass which these tiny creatures have. Using same database of nematode metabolic activity, we estimated that nematodes may be responsible for monthly carbon turnover of 0.14 gigaton within the global growing season, of which 0.11 gigaton is respired into atmosphere. By comparison, the amount of carbon respired by soil nematode is equivalent to roughly 15% of carbon emission from fossil fuel, or around 2.2% of total carbon emission from the soil. So these nematodes play a crucial role in environment, as they are responsible for production of about 19% of ammonia of soil. As a biologist, we talk a lot about biodiversity, inventory, distribution, population structure, and their conservation, but emphasis has always been on above ground diversity. I'm not saying it is not important, but the other half, that is below ground diversity, must be included in our environment management programs, because the plants which are at the interface of above and below ground diversity and are necessary for the survival of above ground diversity cannot survive themselves without good soil health. And for a good soil health, it fully depends on below ground diversity. So the survival of the plants depends on below ground diversity, and the survival of above ground diversity depends upon the plants. So you can see how much important the below ground diversity is. I'm sorry I got diverted to my own area of interest. The present workshop on remote sensing and GIS application is one of the frontline methodology to study above ground biodiversity. Professor Jamal has discussed a lot about remote sensing, and of course in our university we have a full-fledged remote sensing department, and in collaboration, our wildlife department, in collaboration with GIS remote sensing department, they are doing wonderful research. The application of a space-based remote sensing and GIS have wide applications and advantages in the field of environment and biodiversity conservation. Together, RS and GIS present the facility of proficient and cost-effective means of acquiring timely data for the advancement of management of natural resources. Earlier, we used to have persons who will be moving around the forest and counting every animal, counting every tiger, counting every elephant. So now we have techniques by which from the space itself, with the help of our satellites itself, we can get the data. As the application of choice, GIS has central role in analyzing the geographic distribution of endangered species and of course geographic distribution of all the species in measuring and monitoring biodiversity and in identifying priorities for the conservation and management. When we talk of endangered species, I always use one term, and I've been saying that in Ministry of Environment also and several countries. When we talk of endangered species, we are not talking of endangered taxonomists themselves, because the man who are responsible for the identification of animals, they have themselves become endangered, and we have to look for that. We should be responsible. We should be thinking about conservation of those peoples who used to identify the animals. There has been a remarkable increase in Earth observation satellite and sensors over the last few years that are being used to measure and model biodiversity from space. Advances in resolution of space-borne sensors available to ecologists are making it increasingly possible to distinguish species assemblages or identify individual species, whether it is thermal remote sensing or hyper remote sensing or lidar remote sensing. They provide very accurate data on distribution, movement, and population structure of both animals and plants. I hope during these 2 days, our learned speakers who have great experience in remote sensing and GIS application, and with the help of our institute in Dehradun, they will have great discussions in detail about the techniques, which will be highly beneficial to our research scholars or young researchers, and that will give us a, I would be saying, as a biodiversity expert, I would be saying the correct data on the biodiversity of our forest to begin with, and general information about all the biodiversity. Because sometimes when we come up with the data, there are sometimes some people raise fingers that the number of tigers we are talking about or the number of elephants we are talking about is not correct. So the GIS application will be giving us, or it gives the correct data. I hope that the 2 days discussions will be very beneficial to all the participants. I wish best of luck to all the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, respected sir, for your address. I now request Dr. Satish Kumar to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Nazneen. Good morning and adab to everyone. I myself, as well as on behalf of the workshop organizers, wish to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Tariq Mansoor sir, to be with us and to grace the occasion. We are equally grateful to our Dean, Professor Wasim Ahmad, for sparing his valuable time and joining us today. Also, we are grateful to the Director, Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, Dehradun, for allowing his scientists to deliver important lectures on important techniques for assessing biodiversity to our participants and in the workshop. Now, I would like to take the opportunity to extend my thanks to all our panelists, Professor Afifullah Khan, Dr. Poonam Seth Tiwari, Dr. Prasun Kumar Gupta, who would be delivering and sharing very valuable information with us and our participants for the next 2 days. We are equally grateful to the director, Dr. Parvez Mahmood Khan Sahab, and his expert team for setting up the platform for today's online workshop. Lastly, I want to thank all the participants who are attending this workshop from different institutes, colleges, universities, and wish them all the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I now request the Director, Computer Center, and his competent team, who very kindly agreed to host the event, to play AMU Tarana, which will be followed by National Anthem. All are requested to stand in attention position when the National Anthem is played. I now invite Professor Afifullah Khan to deliver his lecture. Professor Khan has many firsts to his credits. He obtained his master's from the Aligarh Muslim University. He radio-collared elephants for the first time in India in the Rajaji National Park for his PhD program. He was chairman of Department of Wildlife Sciences. Currently, he is the OSC Development at the Aligarh Muslim University. He is a celebrated teacher at AMU who teaches RS and GIS applications in wildlife and biodiversity studies, where he puts heart into it for the last 20 years. Now over to Professor Afifullah Khan.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Nazneen Zehra and Professor Jamal Khan, Chairman, Department of Wildlife Sciences, for giving me this opportunity to speak to this august gathering of experts from all over the country and maybe from outside. Let me tell you at the onset of my talk that I am neither an expert on RSGIS nor formally trained in this trade. It was a job entrusted to me by Professor Khan some time back that I must take up the responsibility of introducing a course in remote sensing. And so did I. And from here, my journey started to understanding remote sensing. Professor Khan put me on the test today once again. He is trying to test what I have done over last 10 or 15 years. And I hope with your cooperation, I would be able to pass this test. It's a great topic, talking advances in remote sensing. It's a very vast topic. And it includes a plethora of information. And it is beyond the capacity of anyone to completely talk of advances in remote sensing. I may touch upon a few things which are related to the biodiversity conservation. And I would start my talk with biodiversity conservation rather than remote sensing. What is biological diversity or biodiversity? It is not such a complex thing to understand, and I believe all the august participants or this gathering would already have an understanding what is biodiversity. However, IUCN in 1982 adopted a definition of biodiversity which Wilcox has provided or given since he was the member of the commission who was entrusted the job to provide information on biological diversity and its definition. So according to Wilcox, biological diversity is the variety of life forms at all levels of biological system. Maybe molecular, organismic, population, species, and ecosystem. Later, about a decade, the United Nations took the initiative to host an Earth Summit, and in 1992, once again, a definition of biodiversity was formulated and accepted. And that is the variability among living organisms from all sources, including inter alia, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystem, and ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within a species, between a species, and ecosystems. So in a nutshell, it is the variability among the living organisms wherever they are. And the measurement of this diversity can be at 3 levels. The first one is within a species, which means the variability among the individuals of the same species, and that mostly referred as genetic diversity, because whatever variations are there among the individuals of a species, most of them are genetically governed and directed, and therefore it is within species diversity. Then between species diversity, that involves different number of species living in an area. What is the diversity of this area as far of biological diversity, one which has been given by Wilcox in 1982 since he was commissioned by IUCN to provide the same. And another one, when Earth Summit took place in Rio, then a definition was given. Both the definition agrees to only one thing, that there is a variability among living organisms of all forms on this planet Earth. And the second one has been adopted as a working definition for conservation of biological diversity in its first meeting in 1992 and afterwards. So that going through the definition and understanding that it is the variability among the living organisms, and we see all around us different organisms. There are different birds, mammals, plants, and we know that there's a large number of species are there in the world, and only 1/10 has so far been discovered. We know that also. So my question is, if that is so, then why we are worried about the biodiversity conservation or biodiversity? What makes us to think about biodiversity as an important component of science? And the answer is known to many of you. I have just described a few points here, that it has been worked out that increased biodiversity means increased ecosystem productivity. And therefore, each species in an ecosystem is important because it helps or it has a role to play in the ecosystem. Any loss of the species means you are losing a worker who is doing some particular job. And that is one reason that we are concerned about species conservation, whether it is a plant species, animal species. It supports a large number of plant species and therefore a greater variety of crops. If, as you know, that whatever we eat today as a food, the cultivated plants have the root in their wild cousins. And almost all species have come from the wild. They have been tamed or they have been bred. And therefore, a large gene pool or existing gene pool would ensure more varieties, more variability, and that means it may help us in solving the future and present food problem. Certainly, biodiversity is important from point of view of freshwater resources. It is a two-way process. As the Vice Chancellor of Aligarh Muslim University has also stressed that freshwater resources are limited and their conservation is important because the other part of the biodiversity, which is not aquatic, even the terrestrial biodiversity is dependent on freshwater resources. So it is a two-way process that freshwater resources require plants and plants require fresh water. So it is a cycle that has to operate, and therefore there is an importance of biodiversity. The biodiversity is also important, especially the plants, for formation of soil and its protection from wind and floods. So it acts as a barrier when flood or desertification advances. And therefore, these plants are important. Other species are too important, but in this particular case, the plant diversity is important, which promotes soil and protect the soil from erosion. Higher biodiversity means more nutrient storage and recycling. More individuals, more species, more interactions. Many cycles operate together. Recycling is carried out. Nutrient storage is larger, and therefore it is important. It has been learned that it aids in breaking down pollutants. It contributes to climate stability. It speeds up the recovery of natural disasters. In case a forest area, if damaged by a natural disaster, it is much easier for it to recover as compared to a barren land. And therefore, it is important. Biodiversity richness is related to the food resources as well. If you count the number of species which are edible and people are using it as a food resource throughout the country, several thousand of them would figure in that list. And then only we will be able to understand how much biodiversity values or how much biodiversity components are being used as food resources. A very important component of everyone's life is medical resources and pharmaceutical drugs. Even in today's modern world, where the modern medicine is leading other therapies, about 90% of the drug formulations are dependent on the wild resources, largely plant and animal extracts. So our well-being is certainly linked to the biodiversity resources. And it is needless to say that beauty and pleasure is one part, and recreation and tourism is linked with this beauty which the biodiversity can offer and offers. And that our recreational needs are also fulfilled by this biodiversity. So when it is so important, then we must do something. It is our duty. If the biodiversity is so important for our well-being and existence, then certain actions are required from everyone. And one thing is that we must understand, we must document the biodiversity and its values. We must identify and quantify the threats faced by biodiversity in the world. And once we do it, then we must try to mitigate the conservation and management problems. That is what is required. And that is what has been already flagged, and there are a lot of efforts are being made at national and international levels where all these steps are being taken and continually feeding to the databases. So our problem started, and we understood that identification of a species is important, and Carl Linnaeus is who is considered to be the most modern father of taxonomy. And since the time of Linnaeus, there is a continuous effort of species identification and naming them. All over the world, innumerable number of people are involved about understanding the species, identifying them, naming them. And therefore, we have a list, a very long list of plant and animal species. Nearly about a century later, Charles Darwin and Russell Wallace, both of them have started thinking about the evolutionary process. And since then, we have been trying to understand the species distribution and the drivers or the factors affecting them. There have been a number of theories and hypotheses explaining the pattern of distribution of species, pattern of diversity. A few of them include climate stability theory, productivity hypothesis, intermediate disturbance hypothesis, and many more. And this is an ecological puzzle which these two gentlemen have started, and we are still in a process of solving this puzzle, though not completely. We have not said so far the last word about the pattern of distribution and the factors affecting the pattern of distribution of a species in the world. Some says it is the latitude which differs. Some says it is the altitude which matters. Some says it is the temperature which matters. So there are many empirical studies also, which basically talks of the drivers of species diversity at different local and regional scales. But yet, we have to understand the process. And therefore, there is a number of techniques, methods, and tools which have been developed over last 1 or 2 centuries. And recently, what we have developed, or the scientists have developed, a tool which is known as remote sensing, which we all know about. So that is one tool which may help understand some of the attributes of diversity or biodiversity. I would outline a few of them here in my presentation. So when we talk of the biodiversity and remote sensing, what remote sensing is presently doing and is capable of doing, as far as we can use it as a tool in understanding distribution pattern of ecological communities at a coarser scale, status and distribution of individual organisms and species assemblages at a finer scale, range and pattern of species richness in discrete habitats cannot be done directly, but an indirect method measure of species richness in discrete habitats. So these are few broader areas where the remote sensing is linked with biodiversity, and to say that how we can use the remote sensing tool in biodiversity conservation or management or assessment. Now, a few words about the remote sensing capabilities It is used in land cover estimation. Certainly, when we talk of the land cover, it also includes the vegetation. So there are n number of sensors like MODIS, TM, ETM, ASTER, ALI, Iconos, QuickBird, ranging from 1 meter, less than 1 meter in resolution to 1000 meter resolution. And have been used and are being used to discriminate different landforms and land surfaces at different resolution. And that is what we think is the first order analysis for a species occurrence. Where the species is there, it is in the habitat, in the landscape. So if we characterize the landscape into different similar units, identifying the land cover or the assemblage of plants or the habitat types, then certainly it resolves the first problem. Then we will have to look further. And that further problem is species composition. There are high resolution sensors which can now even identify species, or to talk of species composition, or but depends upon, because high resolution images have their own constraint vis-a-vis the area in question or area consideration. If we have to go for a global scale or even national scale or regional scale, then certainly very high resolution, though it can work, but may not be possible because of the logistic problems or logistic requirement to analyze such a large data, store it, and deduce the information. So there is a trade-off between a small scale or large scale. It depends upon the objectives, what objectives we have to achieve. There are certain species of plant and animals, even aquatic mammals, that those can be identified with the help of remote sensing. So these are the direct approaches where the characteristic or a spectral characteristics of the data allowing deduction of information or analyzing it, classifying it, and getting an informed map or information in the form of the species composition, community structure, or the land use land cover type. The indirect approaches, which relates to the ecological variability or variables, is the primary productivity and chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the currency for measuring health of an ecosystem or plant system, plant ecosystem, terrestrial ecosystem, even the aquatic ecosystem as well. More chlorophyll means sometimes is more healthy vegetation. More chlorophyll means more primary productivity. More chlorophyll means when more productivity, larger populations are there, more diversity. So there are indirect approaches through which we can get information about the primary productivity. Habitat structure based on the characteristics of topography. We have a number of sensors, both the spaceborne and airborne, with different spatial resolutions. And because of the altitudinal elevational differences, we can understand the distribution of species through their microclimatic conditions. And it provides information about the habitat structure of a particular species or maybe group of species. Phenology, with the time series data of high resolution, may help in identifying different phenological phases. And these phenological cycles can give a lot of information. This may provide information about the health of the ecosystem, the health of the vegetation. We can identify using these phenological cycles an attribute, and it helps in identification of species even in the environment. Another ecological variable is the vertical canopy structure. Mostly the airborne remote sensors are capable of recording or measuring 3D in 3D, which can provide information on the properties of the plants, even physical properties of the plant. Height measurements, girth measurements, volume measurements can always be carried out. Vertical canopy structure is also important from the point of view of heterogeneity, habitat heterogeneity. And it has been found that more heterogeneous habitats have more diversity, more species diversity. And it has been shown that vertical canopy structure is important and plays an important role in deciding the diversity of avian species. So indirectly, it can provide a lot of information. There are sensors which continuously provide climate and rainfall data, or now the detection of precipitation and surface moisture at a coarse resolution. Certainly, we may not need a very fine resolution in all the cases because it may not change so frequently within few meters. Therefore, It is a coarse resolution data which helps in modeling species occurrence based on the certain factors, environmental factors like drought, maybe flood, maybe other parameters. Soil moisture is also an important parameter which decides what kind of a microclimatic conditions are there for plant species to grow. And based on one of the parameters like soil moisture, in combination with other parameters, we can still model and think about looking at the species occurrence and presence in certain areas. So these are some of the capabilities remote sensing. Sensors can provide information and we can make use of it. And this is what a lot of people and the scientists are working day and night to explore the possibility and further possibility of improving the understanding of species area relationship, species diversity, species distribution. Now, when we talk of, since we are concerned more about the vegetation distribution of plant species per se for the time being, because it is the base of a habitat and the habitat structure which plants provide and give shape, they are important from the point of view of all attendant fauna. A faunal element may be specific to grassland or the savanna, may not be there in the forest interior. And therefore, understanding the pattern of species assemblage at a landscape level is important. And therefore, I have to just discuss a few things in relation to various remote sensors providing information and what kind of information they are capable of delivering. Say Landsat TM or ETM, both of them are medium or coarse spatial resolution, nearly 30 meter. And there are n number of examples where the data set, one of the probably most used data set throughout the world, where the land cover land use mapping has been carried out and vegetation have been delineated at community level or some dominant tree species level. So it can sometimes discriminate between the most dominant species and good for discriminating homogeneous different homogeneous stands. A spot on the other side is also a full range medium spatial resolution. And it provides opportunity or capability of mapping vegetation at community level or species level, since the resolution is 20 meter to 2.5 meter. It has better interpretability because of the resolution, the spatial resolution. I'm not talking about the spectral resolution. There are certain problems with the spectral resolution of spot, maybe. But this is not a point of discussion here. I'm just talking about that the spot data is good for mapping vegetation at community level, and better interpretation can be obtained by using this. MODIS is again a low spatial resolution, and it is suitable for mapping at a larger scale, larger area, not a scale, but larger area at a national, continental, or global scale, because it provides you, as I told you, there is a trade-off between good high resolution data and low spatial resolution data. You can cover larger area if you have the low spatial resolution, and smaller area is good for higher resolution. Otherwise, it will be logistically not suitable to work out a quick bird data at a global level, to understand vegetation cover at global level. Then AVHRR, its resolution is 1 kilometer. Again, this is suitable for vegetation mapping at national, continental, and global scale. QuickBird, Iconos, and these are again sensors which are of high resolution, and therefore local and regional scale vegetation mapping and species level identification, at least the community level identification is possible, and therefore it is good for local, regional level, or at the local or regional scales when vegetation mapping has to be performed. Then further advancement has made it possible where hyperspectral images have come, and different sensors are there which are providing more than 200 bands in the same bandwidth which other sensors are providing. And since that this spectral resolution is so high, therefore it is possible to go down to the species level identification, and it is one of the advancement in present times where we are able to scan the area for even species composition and community composition or community structure. That is possible. There are a lot of advancement in image classification systems also. Traditionally, there are two methods: unsupervised classification and supervised classification. This unsupervised classification largely run on k-mean and isodata clustering algorithms. There are other algorithms as well, but the most used are these ones. They're easy to perform. There's no problem because no prior knowledge is required, as you all aware. Because this is the basic of the remote sensing. I should not be wasting my time in telling this. But I'm just trying to say that the traditional method of classification is providing opportunity to classify images and vegetation and identify species. But all these algorithms which have so far been developed not necessarily provide accurate results in all the situations. So these are basic methods, and there are, I would say, probably hundreds and thousands of techniques which have been employed using these very basic algorithms to obtain better results. So this is a continuous process whereby these traditional methods are used in conjunction with newer technologies, or techniques rather, not technology, but techniques, to identify and improve the vegetation classification. I give you an example. Of a study of Shrestha, where land use classification in mountainous area of Nepal, he has processed the data and identified the problem and removed those. In mountainous region, a strong photographic variation due to elevation differences, illumination variations, effect of topographic shadows and parcel size poses a problem of correct identification of species and communities. Elevational differences between ridges and valley bottom causes climatic conditions or climatic variations, and these microclimatic variations are often associated with the type of species growing there, and therefore it is not at all feasible for the mountainous region to treat them, all these places equally, the valley bottom or the slopes and the upper portion or the top of a mountain, because there are elevational differences, there are differences in illumination, the differences because of shadows. One aspect is sunlit, the other is dark, and therefore the spectral classification in such situation alone is not sufficient, because these both of the traditional methods, supervised and unsupervised classification, depends upon the spectral classification or spectral characteristics of the pixels. Though the unsupervised classification do take into consideration the shape and size of the training set, but largely depend on spectral properties. So they have come to a solution, and first they have normalized individual spectral band and removed the variation in solar illumination angle or solar illumination. Then they obtained the height data and based on this height data or altitudinal variation in combination with the expert knowledge improved the spectral classification the same. Because they knew on the mountain top, sal forest will not be there. They knew quercus will not be there at the valley bottom. So it was a successful attempt by modifying the existing algorithms, but giving more input into it, and with a combination of additional data, they have come out with a method which has improved the classification and understanding of the species distribution. So I'm just giving an example here to emphasize that there are continuous efforts to understand the existing algorithms and modify the techniques of identification for obtaining better results. Another example is from a study carried out by Stuart in a savanna situation, where this savanna could very easily be demarcated sharply and separated with other land use land cover patterns using the standard techniques, the maximum likelihood classifier. That algorithms has helped in identifying savanna boundaries, but within the savanna, the subtypes, it was difficult to discriminate between those subtypes within the savanna by the same algorithms. And therefore, they also have obtained GPS location of known areas, combined this information from the ground with that of the continuous classification of Landsat data, and a little modification, they could come out with 7 or 8 classes within the savanna. So that is where the savanna has, the classification has improved. But all these techniques are not just 1 or 2, but they are thousands in number probably. And it is very difficult and beyond the scope of this talk to include all. What I want to emphasize that there is a lot progress even in species identification and species distribution or distributional pattern of vegetation communities and understanding its ecology. And there are a number of techniques used by different people to improve the interpretation and improve classification. But these all techniques used by different people, some of them may be of global utility, but most of them are in local situations where the researchers have tried to solve the local problems, as I have just outlined these 2 examples. May not necessarily be true for every kind of vegetation characterization or vegetation communities characterization in all the situations. May not work in deserts, may not work in other places. So one has to be careful when choosing a particular technique to carry out this kind of a work. Now, this is a time I cannot certainly appreciate, because lot other people have to appreciate the efforts IIRS has made in characterization of biodiversity at landscape level. A national assessment has been carried out, and it was orchestrated by none other than my long time, I certainly find him a guru, P.S. Roy and S.P.S. Kushwaha, Dr. Porwal, and 13, 14 more people who were involved in. So it is one of the greatest product which IIRS has produced as far as biodiversity is concerned. It is not that they have not produced other things. They have done a remarkable research in every sphere, in different divisions. But I know of this division because I was associated with it. And let me mention that my journey of remote sensing began with my friendship of Professor A.K. Tiwari, or Dr. A.K. Tiwari, who was then in IIRS. And in 1986, he was the person who had mapped vegetation of Rajaji National Park. I cannot claim to be the first study, but one of the few first studies. Those have been carried out at that time, and Dr. Anil was one of them. I must pay a great tribute to his knowledge, and I fondly remember that he was my friend. Then later on, Professor S.P.S. Kushwaha guided me and has introduced me to the field of remote sensing. I owe a lot, sir, to him. The contribution of Dr. P.S. Roy is unmatched at national level, at the level of IIRS, at my personal level as well. And certainly the contribution, which is in the form of a voluminous information about the biodiversity characterization, is acknowledged world over. And it is one of the guide which can be used as a further guideline for working at regional and local level, where several thousand transects all over the country were established, monitored, data was collected, and then placed into a voluminous report. And this is one of the product of IIRS, which is being used by everyone as far as decisions at higher level is concerned or are concerned. This is one study just to show that forest stand species Until now, we were talking about the classification of vegetation at community level. But here, with the advancement of high resolution or availability of high resolution data, it is possible to map even the species. And this is one example where the forest stand has been mapped for its species distribution. So now, this is a reality which we have sometime thought that it may be a puzzle, but it is now not a puzzle. At least the puzzle is there, ecological puzzle is there, but this puzzle has solved that we can map the species distribution. Invasive species is a challenge. Because all over the world, it is a problem. They have colonized in different areas where they were earlier not present. They are invading newer areas, ecological areas, and reducing the ecological space available for other species to occupy and flourish. And it has been found that these invasive species are also responsible for exterminating some of the native species or replacing native species. So from the management point of view or from the biodiversity conservation point of view, it is important that we must understand the dynamics of invasive plant species. At least the distribution is the first one. How and at what places they are distributed. And therefore, I am just giving an example from a study with Joshi et al. And his co-workers have conducted in Nepal, where they have found out a way to map or model invasive plant species. The first level is where the invasive plant is representing the top canopy. So a simple spectral classification is sufficient to understand the distribution of those species which are at the top of the canopy. Then comes which are mixed. They are not top canopy, but they are understory or mixed situation. In this mixed situation, it is still possible to have an understanding of mixed spectral signatures or radiance and identify the species and areas. May not directly, but semi-directly. The third level is where species are not top canopy, not intermixed, but part of an understory of top canopy. Here, indirect information can be deduced through indirect method of modeling the species distribution of invasive plants. This is what the traditionally being carried out. And the fourth problem is one where gaps are not there and species are totally at the ground level, and the understory and overstory trees are independent of invasive species. Now, how to have this kind of a problem, though it has also been solved by several people or scientists, whereby they have combined the spectral properties of pure stand, then semi-pure stand, but to a less reliable scale. However, with the advancement of the active remote sensors and some of the passive ones as well, with high resolution, it is now possible to go at the ground level and even understand the species composition in the gaps in between, and then find out the species and identify the species. And these invasive plant species can be modeled, can be identified, can be mapped with much ease as compared to the previous situation. Another I would say, the level at which we understand the biodiversity, the ground biomass, above ground biomass. Though the earlier speaker has emphasized the role of below ground biomass as well, the Faculty of Life Sciences, but certainly we are concerned with we are seeing, or we are able to see, not the one which is hidden from us or from our sensors. So here, ground biomass or above ground biomass, the studies on biomass are important from several points of view. It is just not the statistics, forest statistics about biomass, but it provides information how best the ecosystem is doing, what kind of services it is providing, whether the health of the ecosystem is okay or not. And therefore, above ground biomass is important to measure, and there are several methods defined, or there are sensors from spaceborne to airborne which can provide information, and these information can be detected or deduced and interpreted in terms of biomass. Largely, the traditional method, not of remote sensing, but the traditional method is, which is invasive method, where removal of species or cutting down and weighing was in practice. Later, equations were developed based on the volume derived from the height and girth or the basal area of the plant, and then converted into dry biomass or biomass by detecting the moisture contents, which is normally said is about 20 to 25%. And these were the methods, forestry methods, which were time consuming and labor intensive. But now with these advancement in the remote sensing, it is now possible to carry out all these operations in conjunction with the data sets or with the field data. So field data is important in the sense that you have to collect information about the height, about the girth, about the presence of a species. Then this data is used as a training set and then interpolated, and classification can be carried out, which provides you the results of above ground biomass estimation. However, there are two main concerns. One is that though it is true for every type of classification that the images or the data used must be perfectly geo-rectified and it should perfectly match with the ground situation. But here, since you are taking the GPS locations as the location of those trees, which then you are identifying the pixels on the image data and then trying to estimate the biomass. Therefore, it is important to have a perfect knowledge of the area and perfect georeferencing of the data and geometric corrections. Now, this problem, I believe, will be solved soon, where the ground data may not have been used at all because of the reasons that now we have sensors which can even give me or give the information about the number of species, number of plants, density of the plants, even crown diameter, bole height, bole diameter, and all those parameters which I require or which one requires for understanding the ground biomass, above ground biomass. Those equations can now be framed, and there are efforts where this has been done, but it will be more in use after some time, probably, when the technique will be perfect. Until then, we assume that there is a lot of scope of research where the high resolution data can be converted into measuring, and that is there already there, but at a larger scale it can measure and then transfer this knowledge in calculating the above ground biomass. It is just a visual from a study carried out in China, because that was easily available to me, where with the use of remote sensing and forest inventory data, this biomass density calculation has been carried out in different areas. And that gives the dry biomass mg per hectare. So that is possible, and people have been using the ancillary data or the forest inventory data with that in conjunction with the multi-source remote sensing data, and then predicting or calculating the above ground biomass. Another important aspect of ecology and biodiversity is habitat suitability. And this habitat suitability is dependent upon the requirement of animal. A large number of studies have been carried out, but perhaps Dr. P.S. Roy and Dr. Kushwaha are among the few first one to start geospatial modeling or geospatial habitat modeling of animals. I'm aware of their work, and certainly I was also associated, and we have come out with 2 papers on habitat suitability way back in 2000 and 2002. So these were the first few efforts, though indices were generated earlier about the habitat suitability. Indices were generated in US, but modeling of habitat suitability was probably carried out in India by these 2 gentlemen, among few others. And that is based on the requirement. Earlier it was the assumed requirement that the animal avoids presence of human being, animal likes shade, animal prefer forest, animal avoid dry forest, and so on and so forth. So depending upon the kind of an animal and its habitat and interaction, the weightages were given to the equation, and the first iteration of habitat suitability was like trying to figure out where the animal could be found because of the suitability or what kind of a habitat is suitable. But all these calculation of habitat suitability were based on the personal experiences, because at that time the ecological data on animals were also lacking. Now there is a lot of information about the animal species and their ecology. So their ecological data helps in designing habitat suitability. But in the meantime, a lot more algorithms have been developed to model the habitat suitability, and it has gone beyond traditional one, where we would like to say 0 non-suitable, 1 is suitable, more suitable, highly suitable, and so on. Now this informed decision is coming from the hard ecological data, which has been statistically rigorously analyzed, and then afterwards extracting those information or variables which are related to the habitat, and these habitat variables are put into a model, a statistical model, and based on that statistical model deciding which area is suitable and which area is not suitable. So a lot of efforts and technical efforts have moved into it in betterment of ecological modeling or habitat suitability. So that is one area which is still requires a lot of refinement, and a continuous efforts are being made to model habitat not only based on the habitat variable but others also. And in one of the studies which Professor Kushwaha and myself has carried out in Corbett Tiger Reserve, where the sub-models of species or submodels of prey species have been input into the main model of suitability for tiger, because tiger dependent upon not only the habitat characteristics, but what it eats, what it feeds on. So these are, as the science is advancing, as our understanding is moving ahead, we are also trying to relate it to the real situation. Another important aspect or capability of remote sensing is providing change detection. Change detection is a common use platform, I would say. It can be used for any kind of change detection. It can be used change detection in water bodies. It can be used change detection in animal habitat. It can be used change detection in case of climatic change. Any kind of change which is on the surface of Earth can be detected probably by these new elements and detectors or the sensors. However, what is important from our point of view is the change detection is one example of change detection. Here I am giving, it has been borrowed the map, and I'm showing a map which shows the spatio-temporal variation in breeding habitat of bird species. So it is the red area specifies that the original habitat has been converted into other habitat, and green area is the unchanged habitat or unchanged area, which means this is the breeding habitat of that particular bird species, while the red area, though it is purely based on the change detection, how the changes have occurred in the habitat of or the landscape level, and how these changes are related to a particular species well-being. That is one of the case I would like to present here. Another most important problem, as has been pointed out by my Vice Chancellor as well, that due to change in climatic variability, the forest fire incidences have increased over a period of last few decades. Their extent is increasing. So there is a need to understand whether we can monitor the change or not. Yes, we can monitor the change. And change detection is one way. There are sensors which are providing daily coverage of fire and smoke globally up to twice a day. There are indices which have been developed: burn area index, normalized burn ratio, and several others. What is important is not once the fire has took place, then it has destroyed. We have to monitor the changes which may cause fire to ignite. And there are several studies which have been carried out which effectively deals with the situation or the condition where they are able to predict fire and fire coverage. So monitoring of previous fire incidences is one. through the change detection. Monitoring the effect of fire before and after the fire has ignited in place is altogether different story, but predicting the fire incidents and fire hazard regions is more important from the conservation and management point of view of biodiversity values. And that remote sensing and GIS is capable of predicting that, and there are several studies in India as well where the fire hazard models have been developed, which indicates the regions within a small region. Even the smaller national park level studies have been conducted and carried out, which specifies that how much area are under higher fire risk zone. That is the importance. So change detection, fire is an incidence where we can use change detection to understand the effect of fire. Another use of change detection is forest damage by disease and insect infestation. These are two photographs showing the infestation of a disease affecting the species, and then the species totally affected in the sense that trees are no more surviving. They are dead trees, still up there, but they are physiologically dead. Now the same thing is here as in relation to the fire. Fire predictive modeling is a little tricky, but forest or disease monitoring is a little easier, in the sense that it can be detected at an early stage. Early warning, the vegetation gives signals for early warning of detection. And if we do that, that can be carried out. The spectral, spatial, and temporal characteristics of the data is capable of providing information on chlorophyll levels and leaf water contents. And these chlorophyll levels and leaf water contents, or even LAI, is an indicator of onset of a disease. Because if the onset of a disease, not all individuals are equally affected and manifestation is not quick. It is a process which is slow. And in this slow process, we can identify an early warning system can be, early warning monitoring can be done, and the corrective measures can be taken. Though, once the damage is done, it is easy to monitor and it is easy to identify and detect, because the chain detection process is capable of providing such information. So that is all from my side. Thank you very much
for inviting me for this particular session on digital image classification. Okay, so since we are going to discuss about digital image classification, I assume that you are already aware of how the remote sensing sensor captures the data, what type of what is a digital image, and some general steps of processing of digital image. So all those things are clear to you. So if that is clear, then we can go ahead with the classification. Otherwise, I can just brief you about that. So Nazneen ji or any participant can tell me, because unless you understand what is a digital image, you will not be able to understand how this image gets classified. So do you know how what is a digital image, how the satellite captures the data? Huh?
Ma'am, please give a very brief, on this to all the participants.
Okay. Okay. So as you must be aware that there are satellites in the orbit revolving the Earth. In the satellites, sensors are placed. Okay. These sensors have charged coupled devices, CCD, charged coupled devices. And these sensors, they are operating in either one band or multiple bands. Now, what is a band? Band is a part of electromagnetic spectrum for which that particular sensor is sensitive to. Okay, so the sensors that have one single band are called as panchromatic sensors. The sensors which are having multiple bands, they are called as multispectral sensors. There are other sensors also which have some more than 100 bands. So such type of sensors are called as hyperspectral sensors. So you must have heard about these terms already. Okay. So this was about the passive remote sensing, in which we are utilizing the energy of sun, okay, and recording the reflected energy from that part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Now there are certain other type of sensors or satellites which transmit their own energy. And these sensors or these satellites are called as active satellites, active remote sensing satellites. So microwave data is active remote, active remote sensing data. Now active because they are sending their own source of energy. So what they do is they send the pulse, they send the beam, and that beam gets backscattered, reflected from the Earth's surface, and this backscattered energy is then recorded by the sensor. Okay, so why do we require the microwave data? Because in some environmental conditions, such as when there is a lot of cloud, so what happens, the optical data or optical electromagnetic spectrum, the sun's radiation is not able to penetrate these clouds. Microwave can penetrate these clouds and collect the information even though there is cloudy sky. Okay, so also with microwave you can get certain more information also. So this is microwave remote sensing. Then we also have thermal images in the thermal band of thermal range of electromagnetic spectrum. That sense how much is the temperature for a certain part of the area, part of the ground. So this is about remote sensing. Now, when the when we receive the data, we see that this data is in digital format. Digital format. What is a digital image? You all must be aware of a digital image. When you zoom a digital image, you see square areas, and these square areas are called as pixels. Okay, so all of you must be aware of pixels in all our mobile phones, whatever camera is there. So how many pixels are there? So we know all this thing, but how this digital image looks like. Now this digital, along with every pixel, a value is attached, and this value is called as digital number or pixel number, grayscale. There are synonym terms in the literature. Okay, now this value represents how much energy is received from this part of the ground. Okay, so if the object in that particular pixel is reflecting more energy, then the value, pixel value would be more. If the object is reflecting less energy, then the pixel value will be less. Okay, so based on this, the color of the image is decided. Color of the pixel is decided. Now, as we have already discussed, yeah, I know. I'm not moving the slides because at this moment I'm just telling you about brief about the background of the digital image. We have not yet started the digital image classification. That is why the slides are not moving. Okay, so okay, coming back to digital image. Digital image, as I've already said, is made up of pixels, and these pixels, every pixel of value is attached to it, and that value is called as pixel value or digital number. This pixel value tells us how much is the energy reflected from this part of the ground. Okay, so now, as we have already said, that we can either have panchromatic data, single band data, or multiple band data, multispectral data. So suppose we have a multispectral band, the multispectral data. So we will have more than 2 bands. So let us say we have 6 bands or so in our data set. Okay, so all the 6 bands we cannot display in one go on our computer screen. And why is this limitation? Because in our computer screen or in our television screen, there are only 3 color guns, and these 3 color guns are red, green, and blue. Okay, so red, green, and blue color guns are there. So the one of the band we will display in using red color gun, one band we will display using green color gun, and the third band we will display using green color gun. So any 3 bands we can decide and we can display them. So the darkest pixel in that band would be given black color. The brightest pixel would be given red, green, or blue color based on which color gun we are using. Okay, and because of this, we will get the pixels, the colored pixels on the computer screen, and this is called as a color composite. Okay, so this was a brief about what is a digital image. Now, when we, as we have already said, that digital image is composed of numbers only. And only numbers are there. So it is, we can say it is a matrix of numbers. So we can do manipulation of these numbers. So manipulating these numbers is known as digital image processing. There are various steps of digital image processing. It can be pre-processing, image enhancements, and the last stage is information extraction or digital image classification. So now, today in this session, we will be talking about digital image classification. Okay. So now, has the slide moved? Changed? Has the slide changed? Because now I have changed my slide. Someone can put a message whether.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It has moved.
Okay. So now starting with the actual topic, that is digital image classification. Now, what is happening is that we have got the data set. Okay. Now, we want to get the information out of this data set. Now, the data has to be processed in some manner, or some kind of transformation of this data has to be carried out so that the information can be extracted from this data. The same data can be used by various different scientists or observers, and they can derive different type of information from it. From the same remote sensing data, if there is a suppose this agriculture scientist, he will look that data and he will find out what are the type of crops present, what are the different soil types in the area. Someone who is interested in water studies, he will try to find out how are the water bodies distributed in the area, what is the depth of water body. So all the parameters related to water body he will be interested in. So the same data can be transformed in various manners and different type of information can be extracted out of it. So this process of getting the information out of the data is called as information extraction, and digital image classification is one method of information extraction from remote sensing data. Now, multi-spectral classification, because we are going to classify the multi-spectral images. Now, what are multi-spectral image? Multi-spectral means number of bands are more than one. Okay. So, now suppose we have 6 bands in our data. So, and we are talking about an 8-bit data. Okay, so in the first band, we will have pixel values ranging from 0 to 255. In the second band, again, we will have pixel values 0 to 255. Third band, again 0 to 255. Like this, in all the 6 bands, we will have pixel values ranging from 0 to 255. Okay. So you can imagine how many number of combination of brightness values we can have in our data set. So numerous combination of brightness values can be there. So we have to sort out these infinite number of categories into finite number of individual classes. Okay, and based on certain criteria, and this criteria would be decided by the observer or by the analyst or by the interpreter, by the person who is doing the interpretation. So let us define classification. Multispectral classification is the process of sorting out pixels into a finite number of individual classes or categories of data, and this is only based on one parameter, that is pixel value. Okay, we are not including any other criteria in this. When we are involving other criteria such as textures and other things we are incorporating, then we go on doing something else also. Okay. Now, if a pixel satisfies a certain set of criteria, the pixel is assigned to the class which corresponds to that particular criteria. Or in short, what we can say that it is grouping of similar pixels and separation of dissimilar pixels. Once we have done the grouping, we have to assign the class labels. We have to assign the label that this particular group of pixels belong to water. This particular group of pixels belong to forest, and so on. And this entire process we do so that it results in manageable number of classes. Okay. So what we have seen is that from infinite categories, we are coming down to finite number of classes. Now, multispectral classification can be done using a variety of algorithms. We can either perform hard classification using supervised or unsupervised approaches. We can also do classification using fuzzy logic, or we can also apply hybrid approaches. Okay, so fuzzy logic or machine learning also nowadays. So today's discussion would be based only on hard classification, that is supervised or unsupervised approaches. Now, what is a hard classification? In a hard classification, as we have already discussed, that if a pixel is satisfies a certain criteria, it is put into a certain class. That means it is given a class label. So either the pixel will belong to a particular class or it will not belong to a particular class. So that means the answer for this question would be either yes or no. There will not be any fuzziness in between. Okay, we will not say that, oh, 40% chances are that the pixel falls in class A, 30% chances are that the pixel falls in class B, and 20% chances are that the pixel falls in class C. So such type of thing is not there in hard classification. In hard classification, the answer to the question whether the pixel belongs to class or not is either yes or no. Okay, whereas in fuzzy classification, we can assign membership to the classes. So membership means that what is the probability that pixel belongs to a particular class. Okay. Then we have other approaches, machine learning, higher level algorithms are also there. But today we will be discussing only supervised and unsupervised approaches using hard classification. Okay. Now, why should we go for digital image classification? What is the advantage of digital image classification? Because as we have already said that in the data set, we have numerous combination of pixel values. So that continuous variability of image data has to be converted into map patterns, because the analyst who wants the user, ultimate user of the data, he is not interested in data. He is interested in the map that you derive out of that data. Okay, so how to get the map out of that data? Also, we can use this digital multispectral classification to obtain the insight in the data with respect to ground cover and surface characteristics. We can also find out anomalous patterns in the image data set. Anomalous means which should not be there. Some anomaly is there. Okay. Now, it is a cost-efficient way of analyzing large data sets. Suppose you want to create a land use, land cover map of entire Aligarh district. Okay, and you want to do it using visual image interpretation. So visual image means it becomes very difficult doing it using visual methods, because you have to mark the polygons for each and every class, do the interpretation manually, and also large number of image data sets would be there which cover the entire district. Okay. Also, if you engage more than one person, so the objectivity would not be there in the classification. One person has more interpretation skills, so he will interpret it in a different manner. The other person, his interpretation skills are not matching with the first person, so the level of interpretation and finally map making would be different. Okay, so that is why it becomes a lot of subjectivity comes when we are doing interpretation manually. Whereas this digital image classification, it is based on certain fixed rules, so it is more objective than the visual image interpretation. Secondly, that the results can be reproduced. Suppose you want to generate a map, submit it in district headquarters, you have to submit it to the member of parliament also, you have to give it to MLA also of that area. So you can reproduce it very efficiently, effectively. And it means it will be done in a very small time. Also, you can analyze the multi-band interrelationships. As I was discussing in the beginning of this session, was that we can display only 3 bands at a time, but when digital analysis, digital image processing, or let us say digital classification is done, it utilizes all the bands present in the data, and using all the bands, it does the classification. So the information available in all the bands is utilized. Okay, now before going into the details of image classification, let us talk about a few terms that we would be using in our session. The first term is dimensionality of the data. So this spectral dimensionality is determined by number of set of values being used in a process. So in image processing, each band of data is one set of value. So an image with 4 bands is said to be a 4-dimensional image. So if we are saying it is a 6-dimensional data, that means there are 6 bands in the data set that we are going to use. Another term is measurement vector. So the measurement vector of a pixel is set of data file values for 1 pixel in all the n bands. So if you look at the image, you can see I have identified the one single pixel in all the bands. Suppose the number of bands here are 3. So I have identified the same pixel in all the 3 bands. And if I write down the pixel value of this pixel in all the bands available, that would make the measurement vector of this particular pixel. Okay. So now for certain applications, we require or we use a group of pixels also. So in such cases, we may need certain statistical parameter which define a group of pixels. So we can use mean, standard deviation, variance, any of these parameters we can use. So if we take, suppose these are 7 pixels. So for any application, suppose we take a group of pixels. So for this group of pixels, if I take the mean in band 1, mean in band 2, mean in band 3, and so on, then we say that this is and arrange them in form of a vector, then that would be called as a mean vector. Okay, so we will be using these terms later in our lecture. Now, another thing that I want you to be clear about is the image space and feature space. Now, what is image space? Image space is the image like we see, in which the pixels are arranged in form of rows and columns. So you are used to looking at image in this form, in which all the pixels are arranged in form of rows and columns. Okay. So in the digital classification, this image space has to be transformed into a feature space. Now, what is a feature space? Feature space is simply a graph of data file values or pixel values of one band against the value of another band. So suppose I am taking a 2-band data set here, and I have 3 pixels, pixel A, pixel B, and pixel C. Okay. So pixel A has a value of 34 and 25 in band 1 and band 2. Pixel B has a value of 34 and 24. Pixel C has a value of 11 and 17. 77. So now when we plot them on x-axis, we will take pixel A, band 1, and on y-axis, we will take band 2. Okay, so when we plot these pixel A, B, and C on this graph, we will observe that pixel A and pixel B are falling close to each other, whereas pixel C is plotted at an entirely different position. And this is because the pixel C is having completely different values from the pixel A and B. Even though pixel A and B, they might be falling on different part of the image. Pixel A is in one corner of the image, pixel B is in another corner of the image. But because their spectral properties are same, that is why pixel A and pixel B are plotted at same location in the, or close location in the feature space. Okay. Now, how this helps us in doing the classification? Suppose pixel A, pixel B both are representing water, are both the water features. Okay. Now, what we can do is we can draw we can see that pixel A and pixel B are close to each other in the spectral space. So they form a cluster, they form a class, and we can name both of them as water. So like this, when we do this for all the pixels, then the entire image gets classified. Okay, so this is what is feature space. Okay, so please don't confuse feature space. I can show only n-dimensional feature space here, but you can have I can show only 3-dimensional feature space here, but we can have any number of dimensions. Mathematically, we can have n-dimensional feature space. All these dimensions, all these axes would be at 90 degrees to each other, and in this n-dimensional feature space, the pixels are plotted and the pixels are classified in this n-dimensional feature space. Now, how to see whether the pixels are close or not close? So there should be some parameter by which we measure the distance of the pixels in the spectral space. So that is Euclidean spectral distance. Euclidean spectral distance, it is distance in n-dimensional spectral space. It is a number that allows two measurement vectors to be compared for similarity. The spectral distance between two pixels can be calculated using the simple Euclidean distance formula, which is d is equal to square root of summation from I is equal to 1 to n di minus ei whole square. Now, I stands for band number. D and E are two different pixels. So pixel value of two pixels in a particular band, take the difference, square it, and go on summing, doing a summation for all the bands. Then you can take out the square root of that value and you will get the spectral distance. Closer is the spectral distance. Similar are the pixels. Larger is the spectral distance. different are the pixels. As you can see here, when we have given the spectral Euclidean distance as 5, so only the similar type of pixels have been taken here. Okay, so any pixel which is slightly darker in shade also has been excluded. When we have increased the spectral distance to 15, you can see those dark red images, dark red pixels are also included in this. Okay, so if you want to have very pure classes, you can take the spectral distance and less spectral distance, whereas if you want a generalized class, you can go for more spectral distance. Now coming to two different type of classification, which are the supervised classification and unsupervised classification. In supervised classification, the identity and location of some land cover types such as urban, agriculture, or let us say the identity of some classes is known a priori through a combination of fieldwork and experience. So we know at some location, suppose I want to have 10 classes in my classified data, so I should know at least few areas in which these 10 classes are present. So I should know some pixels which are truly representing the water class, some pixels which are truly representing urban class, some pixels which are truly representing agriculture, and so on, whatever are the classes which I want to classify. Now, the analyst attempts to locate specific sites in the remote sensing data that represents homogeneous examples of these known classes, and these pixels which we already know that they belong to particular classes are known as training sites. We provide some training to the computer. That is why this type of classification is called as supervised classification, because we are supervising the computer. Okay. Now, multivariate statistical parameters are calculated for these training sites. Now, multivariate statistical parameters such as the mean, standard deviation, variance, covariance matrix, all these are calculated. Then every pixel, both inside and outside the training site, is evaluated and classified and assigned to the class which has maximum likelihood of it being a minimum. Okay, then based on certain criteria, every pixel is evaluated whether the pixel belongs to training site 1, training site 2, 3, or so. Okay. In supervised classification, you rely on your own pattern recognition skills and a priori knowledge of the data, and the system determines these statistical criteria for data classification. Now, the training sites that are provided to the computer should be good enough so that the proper classification is done. Okay. You can see here this was the remote sensing data. On that data, we wanted a land use classification to be done. So 6 particular classes were identified that they are present in the area. So we had to find out training pixels for all these 6 6 classes. So we have identified some pixels pertaining to agriculture, given here in yellow color, pertaining to dense forest in dark green color, open forest in light green color, dry river bed and water. So something like this, and even urban area is there in red color. So we have identified some sample pixels for all these 6 classes. So for these sample pixels, the statistical parameters such as mean in band 1, band 2, band 3, standard deviation in band 1, band 2, band 3, they are calculated. And based on these parameters, every pixel is checked whether it is inside, whether it will be classified as agriculture, forest, or urban, or so. Okay, so this is how the results of classification looks like, supervised classification. Okay, so in the first image, the supervised classification was done using Landsat data, and in the second, it was done using Sentinel-2 dataset. Again, remote sensing classification here. These are different types of classification methods. You can see the remote sensing image and its classification. Now, the other type of classification is unsupervised classification. In unsupervised classification, the identity of land cover types to be specified as classes within a scene are generally not known a priori because of any problem. We don't know about the training sites. So the computer is required to group pixels with similar spectral characteristics into unique clusters according to some statistically determined criteria. And the analyst then combines and relabels the spectral clusters into information classes. Okay, so you can see here, this is the original image, and the spectral classes were generated using certain algorithm, and finally the class name were incorporated to these spectral classes, and you get a classified map. So this is supervised classification. This is unsupervised classification. After supervised classification, you get the information classes. After unsupervised classification, you get clusters which should be merged or splitted and given the name. Okay, so now coming to training sample and how should we select the training sites, what should be the criteria, how many pixels should be there, so all those details. Training sites or training samples are the pixels, are sets of pixels that represent a potential class. The system calculates the statistics from sample pixels to create the parametric signature for the class. Now, we should always collect training samples from a homogeneous environment. That means if we are collecting it for water, then they should represent pure water. It should not happen that along with water, some pixels are for the soil also. Okay. Now, how many pixels should be there? So suppose I'm going to use 10 bands for classification, then the training sites should have more than 10 into n number of pixels, where n is the number of bands that we are going to use. Okay, we can collect the training sites using a vector layer. We can define a polygon in the image, or we can use thematic raster layer, which was already classified to take the training samples. Now, to evaluate the signatures, whether the signatures are good enough or not. So the signatures should be well separable. Well separable means that at least in any one of the band combination, the signatures should not overlap each other. Okay, so once you find that the signatures are well separable, then only you can move ahead for classification. So there are certain parameters by which you can find out the separability between the signatures. So that is called as signature separability. Signature separability is a statistical measure of distance between two signatures. So you can calculate Euclidean distance, you can calculate divergence, the transform divergence, and JM distance between the signatures. And for every distance, the threshold values are given, that less than that threshold value, the signatures are not separable. More than that, the threshold values, the signatures will be separable. So you can refer to any book for these equations. We will not delve into these equations. Now, once your signatures are properly marked and you are satisfied with your signatures, then you can go for selection of the appropriate algorithm. Okay, so there are various supervised classification algorithms which can be used to do the classification of the classes of the digital images. Now, which classification algorithm we are going to use depends on the nature of input data and the nature of or the output which we require. There are basically two types of algorithms. One are parametric algorithms, the other one are non-parametric algorithms. So parametric classification algorithms assume that the observed measurement vector obtained for each class during the training phase are having a normal distribution. So the training sites have a normal distribution, then only you can go for parametric classification. Otherwise, you can go for non-parametric classification. Okay. So there are various classification algorithms. So one by one, we will look at these algorithms. So how to select which algorithm we should use. Okay. So first of all, this is just a simple rule. You can use it or you can select any algorithm. Okay, so basically we have these maximum likelihood, minimum distance, Mahalanobis distance, parallelepiped, and a simple binary input. Okay, so now first of all, how many classes are there? Whether there are two classes or more than two classes. So if there are only two classes, you should go for binary encoding. Okay. If there are more than two classes that you want to classify, you can go for some other classification. So some other thing you should see. So if more number of classes are there, then you can see whether the sample values overlap or not. Okay, so these are the, you can see in the figure, only the blue and brown pixels are not overlapping. So if they are not overlapping, you can directly go for the most simplest classification algorithm, that is parallelepiped. If the values are overlapping in these three cases, then again we should see what is the shape of the point cloud. Okay, whether the shape is simple or whether the shape is complex. So if the shape is complex, then we can go for Mahalanobis decision rule. Okay, so you can see the blue and purple and yellow combination is having a complex shape. How have we decided that it is a complex shape? Because somewhere the purple thing, you follow one dots, so somewhere the purple dots are going out inside the yellow, somewhere they are coming out, somewhere yellow is going inside, outside. It is a very complicated thing. So you can, it is quite complex shape that we are observing. Whereas in red and blue, you can see it is simpler shape is there. Okay, so when the shape is complex, you can go for Mahalanobis decision rule. If this shape is simple, then again you can see whether there is a correlation between the brightness values or not. So as you must be knowing that if we are observing a ellipsoidal pattern, then we say that there is correlation. So in such cases, you go for maximum likelihood classification algorithm, and otherwise you go for minimum distance to means algorithm. Now we have seen when we should take which algorithm, but now let us see how these algorithms work. Okay, so let us start with parallelepiped classification algorithm. So in a parallelepiped decision rule, the data file values of the candidate pixels are compared to upper and lower limits. These limits can be either the minimum and maximum data file value of each band in the signature, or the mean of each band plus minus a standard deviation, or any limit that you specify. So there are high and low limit for every band for every signature. So when the pixels data file values are within this range, the pixel is classified into this class. If not, the pixel is not classified into this class. Okay, so this is parallelepiped decision. So graphically, if we want to show, so you can see here, there are these three classes, class 1, class 2, class 3. So we have taken the mean of class 1 and lower and higher limit of class 1 in both band 1 and band 2. You please follow the red lines. Okay, so in band 1, we have taken the lower and higher values. In band 2 also, we have taken lower and higher values. So they will intersect and they will form a parallelepiped. Here you can see only a rectangle, but when the number of bands is more, then a parallelepiped is formed. So this parallelepiped, if the pixel is falling in this parallelepiped, we say that the pixel is classified into this category. If not, then the pixel is not classified in this class. Okay. Like this, you can have lower and upper values for all the classes in all the bands. So here you can see we have taken 5 classes: class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, and class 5. We have created the parallelepipeds for class 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and now we have to check whether pixel small a and small b would fall in which particular classes. So you can see pixel small a is falling inside the parallelepiped of class 4. So pixel A would be classified as class 4, that is forest. Whereas pixel B, since it is not falling in any of the parallelepiped, this pixel will be left as unclassified pixel. Okay. So this was parallelepiped decision. Now what happens when these parallelepipeds overlap? So in cases where a pixel may fall in the overlap region of 2 or more parallelepipeds, we have to decide in which manner the parallelepiped has to be classified. So it can be based on this order in which you have collected your signatures, or it can be defined by any other parametric rule, or what you can do is you can leave such type of pixels also as unclassified pixels. Okay, so anything we can do. Now, the advantages of such type of parallelepiped classification is that it is a very simple, we can understand it very easily, it is easy to implement, easy to understand, but and it gives a broad classification, and it is not dependent on the normal distribution of pixels. Okay, the disadvantage is that the parallelepiped has the corners, so the pixels which are not so close also gets classified as these particular classes. Okay, so you can see we have taken the signatures, and these, when we have plotted these signatures, all these signatures are plotted at different locations. That means they are not overlapping. So we can apply parallelepiped decision rule on such type of data set. Okay. Now coming to the next, that is minimum distance to means classification algorithm. Now the name itself is suggesting that minimum distance to means. So we have to calculate the distance of all the pixels with all the means, whichever distance is minimum, the pixel would be classified into that particular class. Okay, so this is also quite simple. As you can see, it requires mean vectors of all for each class in each band. Euclidean distance of pixel is calculated with all the means, and whichever the distance is minimum, the pixel is classified into that particular class. Okay. So for the same example that we have taken previously, now if we take the pixel small a and pixel small b, so pixel small a is having minimum distance with the mean of class A, class 4. So pixel A would be categorized and classified as class 4. Here also, but pixel B, which was left as unclassified pixel when we were using parallelepiped algorithm, this gets classified as class C, class 3 here. Okay, when we are using minimum distance to means classification. Now, advantage is that since every pixel is spectrally closer to any one of the class, so all the pixels will get classified. There will not be any unclassified pixel. Okay, so no unclassified pixel would be there. All the pixels would be classified. But this is a disadvantage also. The pixels which should not be classified also gets classified. So they should not have been classified, but they also gets classified. So now when we have taken the signatures for this particular class, for this particular image, you can see the 3 point clouds of the sample value, they are intersecting, and these point clouds are having simple shape. When the simple shape was there, so we can use minimum distance to means classification algorithm. Okay, so this is when we are using minimum distance to means classification algorithm. The third one is Mahalanobis decision rule. Mahalanobis, as you must have seen in case of minimum distance to mean cell algorithm, we are only using the mean of the class, mean of the training site. We are not using the standard deviation. Okay, so because of which the variability of class is not accounted, is not taken care of. So to correct for that, the Mahalanobis decision rule is similar to minimum distance, except that the covariance matrix is used in the equation. The variance covariance are figured in so that clusters that are highly varied lead to similarly varied classes. Okay, so that is why we are using here the variance. So this is the formula, or this is the equation for Mahalanobis decision. The advantage is that it takes into account the class variability also, which was not done in minimum distance to means algorithm. Okay, it may be more useful than minimum distance in cases where statistical criteria must be taken into account. So, but the disadvantage is that since it is using covariance matrix, multiplying with the covariance matrix, so all the classes which are having larger values in covariance matrix, they get over classified. They tend to get over classified. Okay, and since the equation is robust, so it takes a lot. It takes more time for calculation than the parallelepiped or minimum distance to means algorithm. Mahalanobis decision rule is parametric in nature. Parametric means that it relies heavily on the normal distribution of the data in each input band. So if the data is not normally distributed, the results will not be as we had planned. So here you can see we have taken the training sites and the very complex. When we have plotted these training sites, we observe that it is a very complex shape, okay, for this particular blue one. So blue one is engulfing the red and the green one. So because this shape was very complex, so we can use the Mahalanobis distance class rule. Next one is this maximum likelihood and Bayes classifier. So maximum likelihood decision rule is based on the probability that a pixel belongs to a particular class. The basic equation assumes that the probability for all the classes, all the categories is same, and that the input bands have normal distribution. So if we know that the bands are not normally distributed, and if the weights are not, if the probability is not equal for all the category, then we can use some weight factor for particular classes, and then it becomes as Bayes decision. So this is the equation for maximum likelihood or Bayes decision rule. This is quite an extensive equation which involves the weight factor as well as the measurement vector of the pixel, the mean vector, the probability of a pixel to be assigned into a particular class, the variance of the covariance matrix, the determinant of the covariance matrix, inverse of the covariance matrix, and all the matrix functions are applied, transpose, inverse, and a lot of calculations are done, and the pixel is categorized or is classified. So maximum likelihood classifiers assume that the feature vectors of each class are distributed according to multivariate normal probability density function. The training samples are used to estimate the parameters of this distribution. The boundary between the different partitions in the feature space are placed where the decision changes from one class to another, and these are called as decision boundaries. You can see here we have taken the 4 classes, taken the training site. When we have seen that the training sites are having a prolonged, they are looking like that they are correlated with each other. So we have used maximum likelihood classifier. Okay. When we apply maximum likelihood classifier, we get results something like this. Maximum likelihood classifier is one of the best classifier used in for supervised classification, hard classification, because it utilizes most of the statistical parameters. Okay, as you must have seen in the algorithm, in the equation, so many statistical parameters were used. That is why it is considered very accurate. The advantage is that it is one of the most accurate of classifiers because it takes the most variables into account. It takes the class variability into account. The disadvantage is that it is an extensive equation and it takes a lot of time for calculation. The maximum likelihood is parametric. That means it is dependent on the normal distribution of the signatures. It tends to overclassify the classes which have higher values in covariance matrix. So this is when we are classifying the same data using parallelepiped, maximum likelihood, minimum distance to means algorithm, and so. So this is again classification using various algorithms. This is minimum distance, maximum likelihood, and Mahalanobis distance rule. Now coming to unsupervised classification. Unsupervised classification requires only a minimum amount of initial input from the user. The numerical operations are performed such that search for natural grouping of spectral properties of the pixel. The user allows computer to select class means and covariance matrix to be used in the classification. Once the data is classified, the analyst attempts a posteriori to assign these natural or spectral classes into the classes of interest, information classes of interest. So some of these clusters would be meaningless because they represent mixed classes. Now these clustering algorithms vary according to efficiency with which clustering takes place. Two common clustering algorithms are chain method and isodata clustering. So starting with chain method operates in a 2-pass mode. That means it passes through the registered multispectral data twice. In the first pass, the program reads through the data set and sequentially builds the clusters. In the a mean vector is associated with these clusters. In the second pass, a minimum distance to means algorithm is applied on whole data set on pixel on each pixel, whereby each pixel is assigned to one of the mean vectors created in pass 1. The first pass automatically creates the cluster signatures to be used in supervised classification. So starting with the pass 1, in pass 1, the analyst is required to supply these 4 information, and this 4 information is first of all capital R, that is the radius distance in spectral space used to determine when a new cluster would be formed. Capital C, which is the spectral space distance parameter used when merging clusters when n is reached. Capital N, the number of pixels to be evaluated between each major merging of the clusters, and C maximum is the maximum number of clusters to be identified. And in pass 2, the pixels are assigned into one of the Cmax clusters using minimum distance to means algorithm. So here we have taken an arbitrary data which is having only 3 pixels, pixel 1, pixel 2 and pixel 3. So pixel 1 has a value of 10, 10, pixel 2 has a value of 20, 20 and pixel 3 has a value of 30 and 20. So when the algorithm starts, the Cmax is 0. We have not created any pixels. So what it will do is it will create first cluster using pixel 1. So now pixel one, cluster 1 has only 1 pixel, that is pixel number 1. And the mean of this cluster is also 10, 10 because it has only 1 cluster, 1 pixel. Okay. Then the second pixel is evaluated. When second pixel is evaluated, it will check whether the second pixel has to go to cluster 1 or it will form a new cluster of its own. So it will check with, it will calculate the distance between this pixel and the mean of cluster 1. So mean of cluster 1 at this moment is at 10, 10. So it will find out the distance. Distance is coming to be 14.14. This distance is less than the capital R distance which we have specified, that is 15. So the pixel will merge into the existing cluster. Okay. Then the pixel will, then it will go to the second, the third pixel. Third pixel would again be checked whether it will be merged with the with the existing cluster or it will form a new cluster. So it is checked that it is calculated that the distance here is coming to be more than 15. It is coming as 15.81. So by rule, it should form a new cluster of its own. So pixel 3 forms a new cluster. Like this, the clustering goes on and more pixels are evaluated and they are merged with the existing clusters. In between, the clusters are also checked whether these clusters are close to each other. They should be merged or they should be separated. Okay. So this is how the clusters are created in pass 1. In pass 2, each and every pixel is checked with the mean of these clusters. using a minimum distance to means classification. The next clustering algorithm is ISO-data clustering. ISO-data stands for Iterative Self-Organizing Data Analysis Technique. So it has a comprehensive set of procedures which are incorporated in an iterative algorithm. ISO-data algorithm is a modification of k-means clustering, and it has the rules for merging and splitting of clusters also. ISO-data is iterative because it makes a large number of passes through the data set instead of just 2 passes, which we have seen in case of chain method. ISO-data algorithm does not allocate its mean based on analysis of pixels, rather than that an arbitrary assignment of cluster means is given, and arbitrarily they are assigned, and these cluster means are refined in the one by one in the as the iterations move on. So these are the set of parameters that are required. Cmax, capital T is maximum percentage of pixel whose class values should not be changed between last but one iteration. Capital M is maximum number of times the ISO-data has to do the classification and recalculate the cluster means. We also have to specify minimum members in a cluster, maximum standard deviation for a cluster, split separation value, and minimum distance between the clusters. So all these parameters have to be fed, and initially the spectral space is arbitrarily divided into the Cmax number of clusters, and the arbitrary assignment of mean is also given. Then each and every pixel is checked whether it should go to which particular category, which particular cluster. Then now the new pixels have been added into the clusters, so their mean also gets shifted. So in the second iteration, again the same thing is done using minimum distance to means algorithm, and like this the means go on shifting, and unless the number of iterations are over, or more than m number of pixels do not change their algorithm, their class values between 2 iterations, in such case the iterations will be stopped. Okay. So you can increase the number of classes. You can see this was ISO-data when we have used 10 classes, when we have used 20 classes. ISO-data for near infrared bands, and ISO-data used for SWIR bands. This is again different type of algorithms used for classification, for unsupervised classification. So this is all from my side. Thank you so much. And now I invite questions from the participants. Whatever questions are there, you can ask me the questions.
I think there is no question in the chat box. Participants, if you want to ask any question, please write your question in the chat box.
I have already given my email ID also. So if the participants revisit the session and they get some doubt, they can contact me later on also.
Okay. So ma'am, it was a very informative lecture, very well explained. So I think that's why there is no question in the chat box. As Dr. Poonam Tiwari's email address is available in the lecture, which I'll also share on the Google Classroom. So if you have any query, you can ask it later on, or you can directly mail to Poonam Tiwari ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you for inviting for this particular session, and thank you all. I thank all your teammates, your head of department, your vice chancellor for conducting the workshop, for all the participants, for the students, and as well as the faculty member. So thank you one and all. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, we are really grateful that you, out of your busy schedule, you found time and you graced the occasion in this workshop. We are extremely grateful to you, and I sincerely hope that Dr. Nazneen Zera will continue to be in touch with you and will collaborate with you. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you so much. We will definitely, IARS will definitely help out in all the way, whatever means are there, we will definitely help you out. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
We also want that remote sensing should be, the information about the technology should be accessible to everyone across the country.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You have already been very generous, ISRO. For last 25 years, we have been working with your esteemed organization. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay.
Now, participants, as tomorrow we have a session based on demonstrations. So please download QGIS software, which is freely available on your desktop, laptop. So it would be very easy to carry on this session easily. So see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. The third session will start at 10 o'clock tomorrow. So now we are leaving. Thank you very much.